we share the screen, I just wanted to introduce myself and my co-presenter, Lauren. And looks like we're a small but mighty group today, and hopefully some more folks might drop in. So my name's Jakob Hero Shaw. I am the roundtable coordinator for the Trans Roundtable, and I'm on the faculty of the Trans Religious Leadership Cohort. Oh, yay, got all kinds of people popping up now. Lauren, I'm going to make you co-host.
Okay.
All right. And this is one of the last webinars of this term. I know there's a few more coming up, but we don't have the shameless video that plugs all of our events to show at this moment. So I very much encourage you to check out the CLGS website for all of our upcoming events. And let me just tell you who I am, and then I'll invite Lauren to introduce herself as well. As I said, I work for CLGS, but my full-time gig is that I'm the senior pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Tampa here in Florida. And I'm really excited to be doing a workshop on queering Eastertide, the Easter season through up to Pentecost. And, you know, we can all use a little extra queering. And also, I'm super excited that people are here during Holy Week because, you know, there's a lot going on. All right, Lauren, tell us who you are.
Great to see y'all. I'm Reverend Lauren Bennett. I get to be the lead pastor at Metropolitan Community Church of Greater St. Louis in St. Louis, Missouri. I also work for the MCC denomination planning our conference, which is coming up in just a few months. So if you're looking for a fun conference time, you can join us in Scottsdale, Arizona in the middle of the summer, which is the perfect time to be in Scottsdale. It's not.
Yes, in the cool, breezy town of Scottsdale in July.
Of the desert. Our theme is creating oasis, which we will clearly need. So it's great to be here and great to see some familiar faces and some new ones, and looking forward to queering Easter.
Yep. So this is a group participation kind of workshop. It's not just a webinar where we encourage you to be present. Although if you have to multitask and fold your laundry or something, we won't judge you for it. Well, we might judge you a little bit, but we won't call you out.
Especially not during Holy Week. No judgment, extra judgment.
No judgment during Holy Week.
Yeah.
But I get it. You might be making the bulletin for Sunday or something. But I say that just to let you know that if you've got questions or if like some amazing idea pops in your head because of the presentation, feel free to just speak up. You can use the raise your hand feature, or you can just unmute yourself and just talk to us. Right. I'm just going to get our slides. Lauren, I'll run the slides.
Okay, great. I was just going to ask. We can start off with some introductions in the room, though. We usually ask people to use their chat. So if you want to do that, we can speak it out loud. But we're a smaller group today, so if you want to speak out loud, you can too. If you want to just share your name and your pronouns, your location, and what does Easter symbolize for you? I know it's weird to just jump Holy Week and go all the way to Easter, but what does Easter as a season symbolize for you? And you can either unmute yourself or put your answers in the chat. Name, pronouns, location, and what does Easter symbolize to you?
Feel free to keep adding.
I'll go ahead and start since everyone's so shy.
Thank you.
I'm Daniel Borzowitz, he, they pronouns, And I am in San Francisco, and I'm the provisional interim pastor of MCC San Francisco. And what Easter means for me, or signifies for me, is the promise of new life and Easter bonnets.
Did you say an Easter
Of
bonnet?
course. Oh, let me tell you about the Easter bonnets. It is a tradition that I learned at MCC San Francisco. Yes, and Daniel does it up with the Easter bonnet.
I'm working on mine. Jim saw
Yeah,
some of the fabric and also the frame for it. So, yeah.
Talk about queering Easter. At a church I was at in St. Petersburg, Florida, someone always dressed up as an Easter bunny and was the greeter, but nobody knew who it was. So it was like the mystery Easter bunny. They never revealed themselves. So that was a fun time.
that is fun. We only just decided this past Sunday that we're going to do the Easter bonnet contest at church this year. I hadn't planned on doing it, but then some of you know Brian Parker. He's an MCCer. He came to me and he was like, I have an Easter bonnet. I have to do it. We have to do it. I was like, okay. So
That's
whoever
phenomenal.
wears an Easter bonnet to church on Sunday gets to be first in line for the potluck.
Wow.
That's some high stakes competition right there.
Seriously. Mm-mm-mm.
All right, family. Does anyone else want to put in the chat or speak out loud who you are?
Yeah, I can. So I'm Elizabeth Middleberg. I'm an MCC pastor, but I serve a UCC church in San Rafael as their interim. And I was good answering questions until you threw that one in there about what does Easter mean to you. I just told my church last Sunday, come into Holy Week as if this is the very first Holy Week you ever experience. And I find every year that I somehow need to do the same, kind of walk that whole journey to kind of know what Easter means this year.
What a beautiful invitation. Thank you.
I like that.
Welcome. If you're just joining us, we're asking folks to say their name, their pronouns, their location, and what does Easter symbolize for you or mean to you. You can put that in the chat, or if you want, you can speak out loud. I don't want to reveal
About
what
half
we're
of the
putting in the chat, but in the chat, I just want to say what Easter symbolizes for some folks in the chat is church choirs and wearing fabulous pastels, and church's life before death, as well as promise of life after death. Grateful to have lived a terminal diagnosis 30 years ago. It's huge. Death does not win. Rebirth and transformation from the chat. Thank you. Holy Week and Easter are long lineages of resistance to imperial occupation.
Nice.
And if you want your names revealed in the chat, we're happy to say those out loud, just keeping your anonymity for the recording's sake, if that's important to you. Thank you for your answers.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, I think for me, Easter this year feels a little bit different. It feels like Daniel's wearing a shirt that says "Joy is resistance." Did I read that correctly? Great. Yeah, I love that. And I feel like I need some joy right now. It's pretty challenging to live in our world and live with all the realities that are happening around us that at least I often feel powerful about interrupting outside of using sort of my voice and offering our community to do some things together. And so Easter to me is a reminder that these things that are happening around us do not have the last word, that death doesn't have the last word, and that we have an opportunity to be a part of this, like the salvific work of Jesus to me is much more about building together community and teaching us that like we are our answer. A person is not our answer, but we have the answer and the tools to be able to mitigate the change needed. And I definitely need to be reminded of that right now, because sometimes when I read the news, or just live in the world, it can be overwhelming to remember that, and easy to
Mhm.
despair instead.
Hello, I'm
Hi,
Nancy.
Nancy.
I'm
Hi,
from Valley
Nancy.
Ministries Church in Stockton, California. So a lot of us seem to be from California. I am, and Lauren doesn't know this, I'm a Lauren Bennett groupie. She's done
Aren't we all?
the many conferences I've gone to, and I just love what she does and who she is. And we've lost our pastor of 23 years who resigned 2 years ago. And then we had an interim one who we thought was going to be permanent and lasted, well, did a whole year of working with us. And then when we signed the contract, 4 months and sickness took over and he left. So we now have, or in the process of getting an interim pastor. I'm the vice moderator, and so the gavel's been turned over to me. And so I've been challenged this last couple of months. But we have a pastor coming in who I think has worked with Jakob before, Leanna Hamilton.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we're going to set her in as the provisional pastor starting May 1st. And she sent me a thing saying about this program. And I said, oh, Lauren Bennett, I'm her little groupie. I'm going to get on there.
Wow, thanks, Nancy.
But I am preaching this Sunday.
Oh,
And so
Oh.
working on that has been like to help people understand how do we go from cheering crowds to crucifixion in a few days. And if you
Mhm.
really follow what happened, to me, it's like Jesus was put here as an example for us. And you see him standing up to authority, to turning over the tables, to talking about the temple being turned into, getting money for sacrificial animals at outrageous prices. By the end, through religious leaders turning that crowd from adoring to crucify. And then we sort of forget the next example, I think, is, and it's something I want to get across, is the resurrection on Easter Sunday. Shows us that, yes, you will die, but you will be resurrected. And we talk about Jesus is the example. And then when we get to that piece, we think Jesus is the resurrected one. When in reality, if Jesus is the example and you believe that, then follow it all the way. And don't fear death. Fear putting up with that which isn't fair to people, because it was very clear to us, love one another. And if the poor or the immigrants or the transgender are being put down, the example is stand up and do something. You may be crucified, but you will be risen in the end.
Mm.
So that's sort of what Easter is to be. Don't forget this very important piece. You too will rise.
thank you, Nancy. Sounds like you're ready to go for Easter. Thank you. Wonderful.
Sounds like you've got it figured out a lot more than most of us. A lot of us are in a what we call the clergy ADHD support group, which is a queer kind of lectionary / sermon prep / support group. And I tell you, I know that tomorrow when we have our meeting, there's going to be people who don't have their sermon as figured out as you, and I'm one of them.
Well, it was just interesting to me with I always say, give me a job that challenges me, like put me up in front. And I was asked from a couple of people to please get up there and preach for us. And it was like, okay, the closest time to God in my life is when I have to get up and do something, because man, I need the Holy Spirit to lead the way. So, and just happened to go through the week, what really happened here? Because the leaders all turned against. And then we forget that end. That end is the promise to us. We say it, and we'll believe all this other stuff that we should love one another and feed the poor and get food and water to those that are thirsty. And then we forget that last piece is just as important. It was an example. It was showing us. And we like to believe all this other stuff. And then we get there and we start fearing death or fearing going out in the community and being damned by somebody. It's like we either believe it all and do it all. So anyway, enough.
Thank you, Nancy. I look forward to, I hope your services are streamed so we can tune in and watch afterward. That'd be great.
Sherry just
Yeah, go ahead.
raised their hand.
Thank you. I am here because I heard about this through the Brethren Mennonite Council, and I have looked into pastoring, but I'm not a pastor. I'm a therapist, actually a mental health therapist, and am here to kind of figure out more about what Easter means to me. So that's, I didn't have an answer to that. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. And thank you for being honest about that. Sometimes we were talking earlier, some of us on staff, I see your hand, Jim, I'll call on you in a sec. We were talking about how a lot of us grew up with a very specific theology around what Easter means. It means Jesus died for your sins and that's it. And so living in a different place where it could be different than that. And there's a different kind of salvific force that's not just about substitutionary atonement. Is really powerful, but also a little scary because there's not as many models for that, and they certainly aren't as popular and not as vocal. So maybe there's a little bit of that I'm reading into you, Sherry, but certainly came up for us when we were talking earlier. Jim?
I'm eager to hear. After my 2 years in Duluth, Minnesota for Easter, where it was blizzarding both times, I realized how much of my Easter theology is tied to, rather shallowly, spring, new birth, flowers, all that. And I don't disavow that, but it pushed me to push deeper. So I'm looking for now that I'm back in California, stuff that isn't just about spring and Easter or flowers and all that, because I do think there's more. And I was kind of embarrassed at how shallow my Easter theology was.
Yeah, it is like the low-hanging fruit of the spring foliage. Yeah. Thanks, Jim. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, actually, what you learned from being in the frozen tundra for Easter.
It still happened. It still happened. Easter
it still happened. Oh. So.
All right, we'll go on to our next. So what is queer? That's how some of you have been to our queering the lectionary workshops before, and we pretty much always start with this question. What is queer?
How would y'all define queer? Everybody leans. We can start off this time about offering the definition that we've kind of cultivated through these webinars and through our own study and that kind of thing. Michael put me, yeah. Absolutely.
The
and
queerest.
So you can add to this if that sounds like a good place to start. But we define queer as being different from the norm. So it's not exclusively in relation to sexuality or gender expression, but in looking at every force that's active in our lives and in the world from an open, spacious, a non-binary perspective. So to queer something is to look for the non-dominant expression, experience, or understanding, to look at something not only from below, but from beside, adjacent, betwixt, all of those kinds of things. To queer a thing is to make it visible, that which may be disregarded, dismissed, or we don't see or pay attention to. So that's been a community cultivated definition of queer, but is there something that you would add to that, or something that you would question or want to push back on even?
I like how queer is an adjective, but how we also use it as a verb. Queering interpretation, queering the text. One example that we like to say is like in queering worship, one of the really basic things is using inclusive language. Which for those of us who always use it, when we encounter exclusive language, it starts to sound very strange.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michael. Do you want to say you're muted, so we can't hear you when you talk.
I was going to say, when Jacob said strange, it sounds queer.
Uh-huh. Nice. Yeah, it does. And for those of you who might be new to that, it's like not using gendered pronouns for God, or if you're using one gendered pronoun to use all gendered pronouns, that kind of thing. So it's interesting. Or even playing with all the pronouns. We're doing a Celtic Easter service this year, which I'm very excited about. It's a little witchy. So the idea of Celtic Easter is that Jesus rose with the moonrise. So if like Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb and it's empty, then Jesus must have risen at an alternative time, not at sunrise, because she goes and it's dark outside. And so the idea of Celtic Easter is that Jesus then had to rise with the moon, so leaves the tomb with the moon. And so Celtic Easter is a time when people usually gather around a fire or something like that to proclaim the risen Christ in the middle of the night. So we're like, we're soft, so we're doing it at 7:30 p.m. because we have church in the morning, but other church in the morning. But we're playing with the idea that the beloved disciples, Mary Magdalene. So in the translation in John, there's lots of he pronouns because of who they're imagining the beloved disciple to be, maybe even John. And we're playing with the idea of what if it was Mary Magdalene? And so changing all of those pronouns to she. So that can also be a way of queering or inclusifying the text, of playing a little bit with who are we even talking about and who could it be that is different than what we are used to hearing from. So maybe Jim put in the chat about Easter as a sea of male pronouns referring to Jesus, and someone put a crying emoji in response to that. Maybe you could play with like, depending on your congregation and context, this might be more appropriate for a Bible study, but what if Jesus wasn't male or didn't have to be male? I mean, I think most of us are understand Jesus to be male for all kinds of reasons that made sense in the ancient world, but what if Jesus had a different identity? Like Jesus doesn't get to speak to us in first person.
But even the New Century Hymn Book, which is the UCC Liberal Hymn Book, which is generally pretty good on language, for In the Garden, goes back to male pronouns. And I don't disavow that insofar as I understand the comfort of singing, especially for people going to church once a year. He walks with me and he talks with me. But there's a part of me that wants to change them. Or, the song He Lives. What if we did They Live, They Live? Christ lives today.
Jesus lives today. They walk with me and talk with me. Yeah. So what's queer about Easter?
Yeah.
Oh, I stole your thunder, Jacob. Sorry.
That's okay. We share the thunder. What is queer about Easter? Everything. This is one of the things and we talk about this when I say we, I mean queer clergy. We talk about this at Christmas time too. Like these stories are so queer. When we think about queerness as, what's outside the norm, what's outside of what's expected. And but when you grow up in the church, or if you've been in a church for a long time, it's very easy for these stories that are in the Gospels to just be normal. Like, oh yeah, it's Easter. And I like to really encourage my congregation to listen like it's completely new. And as someone else brought up as well, because it's a very strange story. If you were hearing it for the very first time right now, you would be like, wait, what happened?
Yeah, really.
And you'd be like, are we expected to believe this like as a literal thing? But when you hear it so much that it's just, oh, that's just the story, you forget how queer it is.
And it's so interesting, like everything about the story is queer, right? Like Jesus comes in on a donkey on Palm Sunday, not a horse, not a white horse. Like everything about it's non-dominant, which is fun to play with and could be fun to queer in a deeper way too.
Mike will put in the in the chat. If Mary and the women didn't go, would we have the story? Yeah, that's another thing that's very queer about it in a cultural context that did not listen to women. What there's more significance than we realize about the women being the first witnesses.
One of my favorite priests in this area says that only women should preach on Easter because of that.
Nice.
Or maybe those who are willing to
Well,
wear an Easter bonnet, we could do a pass for
I
that.
was gonna
Let's
say,
be
well, I
honest,
guess I get Sunday off then.
let's be honest, the story wouldn't exist without women. I mean, not just Mary, but even the fact that Mary, his mother, it really is women centric if you think about it.
Yeah, totally. It'd be fun to do a narrative sermon on Easter, like from one of the women's perspectives or something like that.
Mm. What does it mean to queer the texts, and how do we do it?
So
One of the main things is,
yeah,
we've already talked about it. But I think that a lot of people don't realize that it's not about queer texts, it's about all texts being fundamentally queer on some level. Any other thoughts on the queering of the text?
Well, a non-traditional perspective, something that people haven't been hearing. And of course, anytime I open my mouth, there it is.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. I can't remember if this is on a slide or not, so I might be jumping ahead, but that we have these questions that in looking at a text we can ask. Is that on the next slide? Yeah. Oh, good. Our cheat sheet is out of order.
We add to these too. So these are a good one to take a screenshot of or something like that if you're looking for some good questions to ask while you're doing your research or preparation. You want to just go every other one, Jacob? We can read them out loud.
Sure. Who is represented?
Who is left out and whose voice is excluded?
What binary assumptions are presented?
What is another way?
How is this text traditionally understood?
Who does that interpretation satisfy?
Who does it comfort?
Who does it make uncomfortable?
Who is missing from the conversation altogether?
So some questions there to go along with what Michael you were saying too. Welcome, KJ. Goodbye, those of you who have to leave a little early. So this time we wanted to talk a little bit about, so these questions are good, right? Does anyone have anything to add or anything you want to say about it before we move on to the specific texts of Eastertide? Okay. So what we wanted to do for some of our time today is to talk about what are the texts in Eastertide. Every year I'm surprised that people in my congregation who have been going to church for longer than I've been alive, some of them, don't know that Easter is a season, just like Christmas is a season, right? Like Christmas is a season, Easter is a season. It's not just a day. Hector Gutierrez, who is one of the elders in MCC, former elders who is very involved, talks about how he wishes that we celebrated Easter like we celebrate Lent, that it was just as important to celebrate joy and hope as it is to celebrate repentance. And I love that kind of idea. So what would it look like to do Eastertide as big of a thing as we do for Lent? What would those practices be? How could we invite ourselves and each other into that spirit of joy? So this year we're in lectionary year. Anyone know? What lectionary year are we in? It's a quiz. See.
See.
Good job.
Yeah,
Everybody
which way does it
wins.
go? I'm
Um,
dyslexic. I'll do both.
So we looked ahead a little bit to see what you can expect. Maybe you've already done this. Jacob and I are both behind this year, not going to lie about it. So we just looked at it in anticipation of this webinar. You're welcome. So if you're in the same place as us, that's great. If you're ahead of us, let us know what thoughts you've had so we can glean from you. But there's always multiple pathways when looking at the lectionary, if that's where you want to start. It's a great starting place because there's so many resources out there for sermon prep and all that kind of stuff too. But we're going to focus on just two ideas today. The post-resurrection stories and acts. And this year, instead of doing like post-resurrection encounters with Jesus, the stories are a lot more about sort of the early church and what was going on with the early church. And so it could be an interesting time to think about. At our church, we've decided to think about them in terms of reversals. So like you might think that we should be taught in this way, but actually if we live in Jesus's way, it's this way. So like the opposite. So queering in that kind of way of looking at the reverse of what you're expecting. And then those are the stories in Acts, and we have some more slides about that we'll go in a second. And then the other is to maybe you want to like fully lean into the chaos of the moment and go into some apocalyptic literature in Revelation. So there's texts that bring you all the way through Eastertide. And we thought an interesting thing that you could do with that is pair a book study or do a Bible study on Revelation in conversation with a science fiction book, especially something like Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler or The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, to drive home the point that the book of Revelation, it's a dream, but it's an apocalyptic dream. It's not meant to be interpreted literally. And so to drive that home more, to pair it with another kind of contemporary apocalyptic sort of feeling text that might show how this can be used to point us to some truth, but isn't truth itself. Does that make sense? Okay. And then another idea, Jim had to leave to go to another meeting, but he was saying how springtime and Easter goes so well hand in hand, but this might be a great time to lean in on some earth-based spirituality or creation spirituality. For those of you who know Worship Design Studio, Marcia McPhee has a lovely kind of sermon series that's around creation spirituality, borrowing from the work of Matthew Fox. And it's lovely kind of way of understanding the beauty of diversity, the beauty of change, the violence of creation, all of those kinds of things in a slightly different way. So if you love that kind of nature spirituality, that's one to look at too. Oh yeah, the first text I mentioned in pairing with Revelation is the Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. Now I'm going to tell you, like, Revelation's a dream. You're going to have some dreams because it is so difficult to read, and it speaks to the time, even though it was written decades ago. It's very visionary in the way of looking at some of our systemic problems, and it starts off in 2024, so because it's visionary, but it's written decades ago, so it has this weird pairing right now. So just like little trigger warning on the state of the world as you're reading it, if you choose to do it. So that's kind of like, if you want to go all in, that would be really interesting. And she's a Black queer a science fiction writer, Octavia Butler, amazing thinker and revolutionary, really, in lots of ways.
If you really want to have some wild apocalyptic dreams, make sure to watch an episode of The Handmaid's Tale. Read The Parable of the Sower, watch The Handmaid's Tale, and circle back. Let us know how it went.
And go see Sherry for some counseling.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but those are really interesting to read. So on these next slides, we've basically just put the text. So if you're looking at the Acts text specifically, we didn't do all the same work for Revelation, but we're happy to share with you some resources on that too. But just as a way of showing how you can look at the lectionary from a different lens. So we really just did this more as an exercise, not necessarily as like a mandate or an idea, though I have to be honest, we're using this as our idea in the church, in our church. So feel free to do that with us. But the second Sunday of Easter, so the Sunday following Easter, our traditions name those a little bit differently, but it's the story of the apostles are defying authority. They're teaching where they shouldn't and what they shouldn't be, and really proclaiming a loyalty to Jesus and Jesus's ways instead of oppression. And so it could be a really interesting thing to talk about, like queer teaching. What are the queer teachings that we need to uphold in our communities in a different way, especially as things are being torn down in our society, and DEI is being like really in the front of so much hatred right now. Institutions are losing so much money, and all that. We don't have to go into all that, but it could be an interesting thing to look at in there. In a sermon or in a class or something like that. You could preach about the death penalty and how wrong the death penalty is. There's some thinking that though all of the federal sentences were commuted, all but 3 during the end of Biden's presidency, that Trump is so pro-execution that there could be some down the road repercussions to some of the judges that are being selected right now for federal cases. And so those people wouldn't be executed in the next 4 years, because it usually takes decades for someone's trial to go all the way through. But it could be a really good time to think about that, because people who are in your congregations could be the very jurors who are on the slate to decide how people are going to be treated. And so I'm talking about the death penalty right now is really a prescient issue in a way that it may not feel like, because there's not a lot of cases that are active. And there's that part about hung him on the tree, which really goes more into like the lynching kind of side, like the cross and the lynching tree, James Cone, that kind of pairing those with more modern examples of execution and lynching. Go ahead, Jacob.
And if we're talking about the death penalty, tying that to it being a racial justice issue, the disproportionate number of people of color who are sentenced to death, and also a like economic justice issue as well. There's so much richness in there, and people, the reality is that there will be people who say, I come to church to be uplifted, not to deal with politics, and framing it so that they can understand that this is not a discussion about politics.
Right. So these are just more examples of that. We don't have to go into all that detail. We don't want to take away all the time to go into all these ideas, but the conversion of Saul, you could think about leadership. It's a pretty wild idea to think about giving an outsider a second chance who's done harm to your community. I don't know, that's a pretty difficult topic. So thinking about leadership in a different way, like what do we do with cancel culture that's all over our society right now? How do we see that in our communities, and where's the role of justice in that? Tabitha raised from the dead. I've never heard a sermon on Tabitha being raised from the dead. Maybe you've preached one. I'd love to hear what you said. But I've heard a lot about Lazarus, so that would be interesting to do one from a different perspective and think about Tabitha and what the meaning is of her life and why it was important, and another kind of idea of chosen family there. The 5th Sunday of Easter is that weird. It's like the sheet comes down from heaven with all the weird animals on it. You know what I'm talking about? That part? Yeah, that's what this text is.
That weird vision about everyone
that weird vision. But it's really about, like, if someone is being condemned, like God doesn't condemn anyone. Of course, it's said way better in Acts, and I'm not good at saying word for word what's in the Bible, but that idea is in here, and it's powerful, right? Like, who's at the table? Everyone's at the table. So a lovely way to kind of bring in some of our queer identity and belonging and community. There's some formatting issues with this one, but the
Yeah.
sixth Sunday of Easter is about meeting strangers. Paul has this vision, and then he gets to know Lydia through that. So again, about like trusting someone who wouldn't be trusted during that time, or inviting someone else in, that kind of thing. And then the story of the ascension. What would it look like to think about transcendence, or queer transcendence, or joy, or some of those things as a spiritual practice, about sort of what is left in that for us. Jesus leaves the binding of the earth to rise to heaven, transcending a binary in that, transcending what it means to live. Like, that's all really interesting. And then Pentecost is super queer anyway, right? It's like this big party where everybody's speaking different languages, and the Spirit is coming on everyone, and there's like, are people drunk? What's going on? It's such a interesting and fun text that we get to do every year. So there's some fun ways to queer that too, and to think about, there's one church that I know of down the street that they have children in the choir loft. It's a pretty small church, but they have kids go up there, and they throw paper airplanes down as like kind of evidence of the Spirit. So like this kind of chaotic, messy, fun, unscripted sort of thing that happens there. So is there a way that you could invite some of the unscripted into worship, or the kind of chaos or joy? Everybody would feel differently about being hit in the head with a paper airplane during worship. So you can imagine how some people felt about like the Holy Spirit descending on the people. Is everybody happy about that? I don't know. It's interesting to think about.
I know somebody who is so queer that she got married on Pentecost. And that person is Lauren Bennett.
It was great. 10 out of 10, highly recommend. So does that help a little bit? Just like an idea of how you can look at some of the texts and queer them, even though they're not outwardly queer text on their own. Any comments on any of that? Anything like ruffling your feathers, or you're like, oh, I'm excited about thinking about this?
So I have a question, but I don't know if I can formulate it well. So let me see.
Oh, go for it.
So like just yesterday, Harvard decides to not give in to Trump, right? Which is a major big deal. And I'm like, oh, that's a great example for Easter, for resurrection power. But then I'm like, if we see resurrection power at work, how do we stay out of judging certain things as part of resurrection power, and therefore other things not, right? So I need a step in between. It's like, how does the resurrection power live in us and lives in human being, that then propels people to certain actions and not to other actions? Does it make sense what I'm saying? I mean, it's easy to say, oh, like Jim said, the Easter bulb, and look, there's new life. There's Easter is happening, right? It's like, oh, look, people are resisting. This is happening. Easter is happening. But if we do that, then there's other things that we then deem not as Easter or not as resurrection power. So then we get into more of a judgmental or binary way of looking at what's happening around us. Do I make sense?
Yeah, you make sense to me. What I'm hearing is and maybe I'm inserting my own, so please correct me, but is the difficulty of proclaiming what is good in the world and what is evil or what is bad, at the expense of maybe potentially alienating something or someone, or like creating a false binary that like blinds us to the opportunity that we have right now to like come together anyway. Does that resonate?
Some of it. It's like, how do we create it's like, how do we to me, there needs to be a step in between what we see and resurrection or the Easter power itself. So that we don't go from, oh, this is resurrection and this is not resurrection. Not because I don't want to offend anybody, but I don't want to make these quick. Anyway, I'll think some more about it.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is really interesting, though. Some of us have been doing sanctified arts, everything in between, which kind of invites us to look at
Right.
the binaries and look at the in-between spots. So I've been really compelled this whole time with not making quick judgments either on things that I like really just want to, take my protest sign out and be like, what the heck at best. And not judging everything so fast, which is very difficult for me personally, because I'm like very opinionated. But to sit in the middle of that, I think, is an invitation, and sort of is what Jesus does in this resurrection time, right? Like Jesus is hanging out with the people for 40 more days. I don't really know what to do with that in this moment, but it's interesting to me, and I note that. So I appreciate the question because it's getting me thinking in a different way too, to not just be so quick to judge a good thing or a bad thing, or like right now it's really easy to just make a reactionary statement or do a reactionary retaliatory thing even, which divides us so much, right? And then it's hard because like there are just some things that need to be called out. Like we can't be deporting people to,
Absolutely.
yeah, like this is just the things that are wrong.
Right.
But yeah.
One of the things for those of us who are using the Sanctified Art current series for Lent, you might have seen in there they did a thing about calling out versus calling in, calling people into discussion instead of just calling people out, which, anyone who's done like trainings in community organizing has probably encountered that idea before. But I realized when it was part of the stuff for Sanctified Art, for those who don't know what Sanctified Art is, it's we're going to talk about some resources at the end of this, but it's one of the places where you can get some really good kind of somewhat scripted worship ideas and really, really fantastic art that can go along with your worship series. But they, anyway, when I said something about calling in, I realized, wow, most of the people at my church did not know that language. And it was such a great opportunity to explore a different way, because we most definitely live in a call you out kind of culture. So
yeah, I've been thinking about Judas a lot lately. I don't know. I think Judas is challenging, but like, what would it have looked like to be able to like call Judas in? I mean, obviously, like Jesus doesn't get the opportunity because Judas takes his life, but I wonder what Jesus would have said if we would have been privy to some of that, right? Like, that's interesting to me. Or like with Thomas, Jesus is so gracious. And there's like so many opportunities to think about what it looks like to call in in the post-resurrection stories.
right. And
That
then
could be a really cool
Judas,
series, actually.
yeah. And what kind of transformation could have happened for Judas in which he doesn't end up dying by suicide? Like could there have been a total transformation in him? And on that note, total shift of direction. If you do want some queerness in your queering, June is Pride Month. You could do an entire, like, depending what kind of church you're in. Some churches are very strict about the lectionary, but a lot of us are MCC clergy and we do what we want. What would it look like to have either a June Pride Month series or have a queer Eastertide? So starting with Easter is, you do Pride Month all the way through end of April, all through May and June. But here are some other options. turn into a season. Blessing of glitter queer service for 10 minutes, apparently. I didn't notice that was on the slide.
I wonder what that was from.
I copied and pasted from our notes and I left that off. Or I should have left that off. Anyway, but what would it look like to bring that into our Easter? So Pentecost this year is the second Sunday of June. So there's going to be some overlap with Pentecost and Pride Month. And what can we do with that? And here's one option. If you wanted to do a 5-week series where you look at the progress flag and in week 1, the rainbow, the original rainbow, week 2, looking at BIPOC themes. Week 3, I like this that Lauren came up with, the ace and aromantic, and maybe connecting that to Jesus. We don't know what Jesus was or wasn't into, but what does it mean to have this assumption that Jesus had no sexual desires? That's certainly what a lot of people think. Then week 4.
Well, I think, not to go on too fast, but I think we, at least in our church, tend to discount single people or ace or aro people because we're so focused on gay marriage or polyamory even. Like we make lots of space for families, couples, people who have like an expressed sexuality that means that they want to share their bodies with others. But we're not very good at least in our church, again, contextually you might be different, but about like celebrating celibacy or celebrating people who are asexual or aromantic. And so it's an invitation, I think, to us to think differently about that too. And to think about like celibacy could actually be a gift and a freedom if that's yours to practice. Some people have been told that that's the way that they need to be faithfully. So there could be a way to explore some of that in a way that could really open up into a freedom of expression that I think sometimes living in the nuance of that in some of our queer-centered churches can be pretty difficult, at least what I've found.
And then looking at trans folks for the 4th week, and then the whole progress flag for the 5th, and looking at what is progress, especially when we consider that there are some people who are resistant to the idea of the progress flag, right? And at least I've experienced that in my church, and I had to do quite a lot of education that I wasn't saying that it's wrong to have something that has a rainbow on it. We can have multiple kinds of flags. So, what is progress? All right, here are some resources that we recommend. We do not get a kickback from any of these. Enfleshed. Even if I just think everyone should subscribe to Enfleshed because what they put out is so gorgeous. Even if you're not a person who's preaching every week, just looking at what they've created, it is so beautiful. A Sanctified Art, which is the resource I was talking about earlier, they have incredible visual art stuff and recommended songs and different kind of commentaries on each of the texts. And they have some lectionary based resources and some non-lectionary. Really also very good, I find, for those long stretches of ordinary time, like throughout the summer where you're just like, oh man, maybe I need a break from the lectionary. Worship Design Studio also has a ton of different lectionary and non-lectionary resources. The Black Liturgies book and I love pulpit fiction. It's a podcast, very entertaining. You know, two straight white dudes who are really progressive and uh, you know, just talking about the lectionary each week. It's entertaining, even if uh, again, even if you're not prepping for a sermon, it gives you new insights into the text. Lauren, was there anything you wanted to add about any of these or any other resources?
Working Preacher also has a podcast
Yeah.
too that you can listen to that's lectionary based, and they changed their format recently, so it's a little different. So if you didn't used to like the old one, you can try the new one. It's a little different. I also love pulpit fiction. So this is an artist, Scott Erickson, who does art. I'm so sorry. I should have thought through that better. But he's wonderful. You've
An
probably
artist who
seen
does art.
things around, yeah, around for Advent. He did on Instagram. He was doing like a daily sort of post on Instagram for Advent. That was really lovely. But he has a resurrection series. These are the pictures in the resurrection series. So it could also be a time to embrace art in a different way. And so there's companion pieces to each piece that talks about what the piece means and what he's trying to communicate by it, and has some reflection questions for it. So if you're just looking for different ways to kind of queer your worship service overall, you could look at that. A couple of years ago, we did a sermon series, maybe that was just last year, on Emerge, which was actually taken from a general conference. And I know several people are doing that this year too. And we had a painter paint on a canvas every week, and she like made a cocoon, and then the next week it opened a little bit. So we paired that with this series, and she was painting throughout the whole service, which was really cool. And so it was a fun way to embrace the arts. So that could be another way of sort of thinking about new life, resurrection, art, new interpretations, that kind of thing too, by inviting an artist or using a resource like from Scott Erickson.
I'm going to stop this share so we can all see each other a little better. And we just have a few more minutes, and we wanted to know if you had any additional resources that you want to share, or thoughts, or maybe inspiration as we go into Eastertide.
Just a couple things. One, I didn't know all these resources existed, and I think if I had known about many of them, I'd be more likely to be a pastor at this time. So that's just interesting to note. And then the congregation that I'm a part of is not predominantly queer. And so I'm wondering about how it would be or feel to pastor and to lead with a queering of Eastertide, and not have that be something that the congregants are familiar with, or even like readily accepting, and how that would feel. I think that would be scary and potentially really fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love about queering stuff, queer as a verb, is that so when I came to Florida after being in seminary in Berkeley, and everything was queer, 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 and then I came here where like we don't use that word here. I mean, I do, but I don't use it from the pulpit unless it's like said along with all the other LGBTQ, because it triggers people. And I'll use it in maybe a class. I teach, I'll do a class at church, but I'm careful about it. But everything about queering stuff I do every week. I just don't tell them that what we're doing is queering. So especially around those questions that we had around like whose voice is left out, whose voice is given priority, I always think about those kinds of questions, which is very much querying the work. And you can be sneaky and do a lot of querying of things without telling people that that's what you're up to. You can do it in your practice too,
Totally.
with your
Yeah.
clients, because so much, this is why I'm like obsessed with queer theory and things like that, because so much of it is just about stepping out of what we've accepted as what's normal, what's given priority, what's the right way, and instead we're looking at what is a different way of seeing the world. So, but you know, there's all these resources, so if you want to become a pastor, there's certainly a lot of people that you can talk to who are right here on this Zoom call.
It's not too late.
It's never too late.
I
Look
wanted
at
to
us
chime in
living.
on that real quick too. Yes, it's never too late, Sherry. The church needs you. The world needs you. And yeah, I think another inroad I would add too is that this queering as a verb, and to the extent that that's disrupting dominant oppressive power structures, like that work is liberatory for everyone, including those of us in dominant and privileged positions. So that to me is often a helpful inroad in, you know, speaking with majority non-queer congregations or majority white congregations or whatever the dominant category is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to underscore what Jacob said too, and Annabeth, what you're sharing is like that too, right? Like you can be doing things and not claim what it is. You just live it, and you don't have. You can do a queering Easter sort of idea throughout the whole time, but not tell anybody exactly what you're doing, and people will, you know, maybe accept it in a different way than especially the congregation you were describing, Sherry. It might be a little bit much to say we're doing queering Easter this year. People might, you know, maybe that's like not the start you want to take, but you could do it anyway, you know.
And then what you find is that every week people come up and say, wow, I never thought about it like that. That is a totally new way to see that text. And you're like, my yes, exactly. My plot is working. And you know, I was joking about trying to recruit you to be clergy. Although if you're feeling called, you're feeling called. I mean, that's its own thing.
Exactly.
But there are lots of ways that you can be in a clergy type role and support a congregation and lead people without, you know, spending $80,000 on seminary.
Well, and I reckon you're doing some of that because you got here somehow. It's kind of a weird way happening too. Elizabeth, were you going to jump into?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, I really love that whole process of Eastertide, because we're so used to doing something and then we leave it behind. And my favorite Sunday to preach is the Sunday after Easter, and to say, so what the heck was Easter about, right? And as you're talking about this Eastertide, I'm gonna pull that out a little more, and in my sermon Sunday say, I'm gonna ask each one of you after Easter what Easter was about for you, just to get people really thinking about what is Easter about, and then whatever they come up with, I can then use again in another sermon. And the other thing is that April 22nd is Earth Day. So the Sunday after Easter, we're having our Earth Day Sunday, which we do in the courtyard. You have a beautiful courtyard. And I'm like, okay, so we had Easter, we're landing in the garden. So I'm going to make that. I don't quite know what else I'm going to do with it, but I'm like, oh, there's a beautiful connection of like, right after Easter, we're landing in the garden. There's got to be some reason why we're landing in the garden right after. Anyway, so those are some thoughts. I really appreciate the space you guys created to all things through.
Thank you for being here. The space is ours, all of us, including you. So thank you for bringing you. Yeah, there's something for Celtic Easter. One of the things we've been thinking about is like gardens and graves together. Like, what is that about? Some like interesting stuff there. Or again, like betrayal and violence of a garden. Not just like the beauty and awe of it, but like I don't know, there might be some interesting things to play with in that.
Well, thank you all for being here with us. And I wish you all an incredible Easter of experiencing the resurrection in new ways that you never have before.
Thank you.
Amen. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. See you tomorrow, Jacob.
Yep.